Alright, so I wanna, this is actually
Is power your games, and the next big steps have been
a video that's been posted by Gameranx because Gameranx didn't cover every aspect that I think should be covered by this particular video, but it would be good to actually display it before launching into what I have to say.
DirectX 12 and Vulkan. And while we've talked a little bit about DirectX 12, a lot of people are wondering just what is Vulkan? Well, to understand what Vulkan or even DirectX 12 are, you need to know what an application programming interface. An API is a set of protocols and tools for building software applications. Pretty much everything has to use an API of some kind. If nobody used APIs, nothing would get done because everybody would be writing everything. Every single call to every single possible function would have to be rewritten for every single program or game. For instance, there's a Microsoft Windows API, which allows you to call the various functions of Microsoft Windows. Similarly, all hardware typically has some type of an API or uses some kind of a generic API, and that's what DirectX 12 and Vulkan both are. Now, obviously, DirectX 12 is the latest version of the DirectX API, and also it's pretty easy to tell.
I don't actually know if that's still true to this day, but it probably is. DirectX doesn't seem to be updated as much anymore as it used to be.
The DirectX 12 is developed by Microsoft, who also develops Windows. Vulkan, however, is developed by a third party, Kronos Group, and they've been working in conjunction with AMD with the intention of making something a little bit more open. In fact, Vulkan is the actual successor to OpenGL, which was the primary competitor to DirectX. And
that's something that I just recently learned. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew about OpenGL. I didn't know that particular aspect of it, but cool.
Again, was open. The intention of Vulkan is basically to be a next-generation OpenGL. However, it has developed quite a bit further than that. AMD, like I said, who is working with Kronos Group, has been working on an API specifically for AMD hardware called Mantle. Vulkan is actually derived from and built upon components from Mantle. Vulkan is just a little bit more specific than DirectX 12. Vulkan is more of a direct competitor to Direct3D 12, which is the component of DirectX 12 that's specifically used by graphics cards for gaming, or, other 3D things. There are other 3D things that aren't gaming, but this is Gameranx, right? Now, the purpose of Vulkan is obviously to compete with DirectX 12. Like I said, it's a little more specific, but that's the point. Now, what it's not more specific about is what platforms it can work on. While DirectX 12 has generated some impressive results, it's restricted to the Microsoft Windows platform. Vulkan supports Microsoft Windows, OS X, Linux, and even Android. In fact, Google has gone with Vulkan as its primary means of conveying graphics as of 2015. That is the Android low-level API. What this means is that developing a game that is very cross-platform is suddenly significantly easier to do, as the APIs are the same, or at least similar, on every single one of these platforms. Samsung, for instance, is using the Android integration in an attempt to make its TouchWiz UI less of a disaster on battery life, so Vulkan does have applications elsewhere. But back to gaming. The Vulkan API particularly excites a lot of the people that are interested in SteamOS, which is a variant of Linux. The intention of SteamOS is to create an operating system that enables the Steam machine movement to create something that could possibly work out a lot better than a gaming console. If a game is designed exclusively for DirectX 12, well, it takes time and money to port it over to other platforms. If a game is developed for Vulkan, it still takes time and money to port it to other platforms, but it takes significantly less. And anybody who's interested in gaming on any platform other than Microsoft Windows has to understand that that's a big deal. And even those of us that stay on Microsoft...
Yes. One aspect that the comments section went over too was that this is big news for the Windows 7 and Windows 10 holdouts. It's a big deal for them because DirectX is, one of the primary reasons to upgrade to the latest version of Windows. Now, I run Windows 11 myself and Pro and everything, and I also have a Linux box in the other room. I'm a weird sort of hybrid person who likes both, you know, and I don't really like Microsoft, but I've kind of been changed to their ecosystem for reasons like this, like games, you know, and binary compatibility on Linux has been a primary, you know, issue. Also, just not really knowing how to troubleshoot, you know, super effectively on Linux. You know, at this point and stage and things, it's often, you know, reformat and rebuild your system, which is crap. You want to be able to fix things without having to go through a reformat.
Microsoft Windows have to understand that not everybody likes Microsoft Windows. I know, you're probably thinking, Falcon, you jackass. You sold us out. No, that's not what I'm doing. I'm a gamer. I'm loyal to gaming, not to Microsoft Windows, not to SteamOS, not to Mac, not to PlayStation, not to Xbox. None of this stuff matters to me. I like playing games, and I'm enthusiastic about the idea of more people being able to play more games. Vulkan, unlike DirectX 12, is a platform that does more enabling of that rather than encouraging people to develop on a specific platform. You might be able to guess that Valve actually is on the side of Vulkan, with Microsoft attempting to do a lot of the things that Steam does but natively in the Microsoft Windows interface. You have to imagine that Valve would much rather, do anything other than DirectX 12. A, because Valve has SteamOS and wants the Steam machine movement to continue, and B, because they probably don't want Windows to make Steam outdated. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen. Windows itself doesn't have the same kind of gamer community that Steam has. In fact, community is a strong element of what Steam is, and that's why it will probably stick around without much issue, even in a post-Windows/Xbox merger. Frankly, Steam matters. And the point of DirectX 12 is to get people to develop games on Microsoft Windows. The point of Vulkan is to be the best game development API. Now, that doesn't mean DirectX 12 is really technically inferior than Vulkan. There have been benchmarks that have said things in favor of both. I will say oftentimes with Vulkan performing just a little bit better than DirectX 12. But in all honesty, I'm not biased towards either one of them. As I said, gaming is what I care about. And while technically the idea of an open low-level API is what matters to somebody who cares about games, that doesn't mean I don't see corporate interest in Vulkan. There is an agenda behind Vulkan. You have one of the major graphics card makers involved with it, and you have Valve involved with it. These are companies that have their own interests and agendas, and with them supporting Vulkan over DirectX 12, one has to wonder if it's actually because it's an open API, or if it's because it's against Microsoft. Vulkan's getting pretty widespread support. For instance, it was based on technology by AMD, but NVIDIA has thrown their support behind Vulkan, as well as Intel, Imagination Technologies, Qualcomm, and others. But in trying to be as objective as I can, I have to say that just because it's Vulkan doesn't mean it's better. It means it's associated with a better principle than DirectX 12, and that's the principle of openness, but that doesn't mean that there won't be people that attempt to use that. Tentatively, I would say that I am a supporter of Vulkan over DirectX 12, but that's on principle. Whatever gets me playing more games that I enjoy is technically going to be the one that I automatically favor, but we're still pretty early in that race. The next couple years are really what's going to tell us what the big deal is between these two APIs and which one actually ends up coming out on top. Just to say it one more time, I would much prefer the platform that allows people to develop on as many platforms as they can to be the one that reigns supreme. But again, I'm pro-gaming, not pro-branding. What do you think? Which one makes you more excited about the future of video games? And I know there is one of them. You had been thinking about it because nobody will shut up about it.
So there are things that this video didn't really explore that I wanted to talk about, and as you see me thumbing through and going into, my own settings, I want you to see this, and I know I'm playing Xenosaga, it's old, and I'm playing a newer copy of it because I missed it, when it came out. I never actually got through the game. I started watching other people's Let's Plays, but I got bored, and so it was just like, fuck it, play it yourself, But let's go into this. See, look at the renderers that are now available in PC SX2. Vulkan and that's probably going to be the default that it selects, for its automatic defaults, and I went with the automatic and see if you can see my mouse corner, but Vulkan's down there in the corner, right over, I don't know if you can actually see. Oh, you can. So yeah, Vulkan is actually rendering the graphics in PCX. This is not the only system that does this either. This is not the only emulator that goes in that direction. If I'm going to close out, I should hit. And save state. No, I love save states. So, I need to be able to resume at my own discretion. So, towards you, master. Now I have to actually compile that, so that's useless at the moment. But, here's Gameranx, before they went under and got rid of it. Now that binary still exists on my system, so it doesn't matter that they went under. It's powering my playthroughs of these games. Now, it obviously can't update itself anymore because of the fact that Nintendo's look at its nature, shut this shit down. But again, I want you to see which render that they happen to use. Vulkan. Now, what is my point here about why all of this should matter to gamers, especially those of us that, are, I guess you could say, not huge fans ultimately of Microsoft itself and being chained to their ecosystem. We would like a greater degree of freedom to go over and to explore other platforms and other hardware vendors. Well, the ongoing reality now is that because Vulkan is based on the principle of openness, that principle is being seized upon by people who develop emulators for things, which means that Vulkan development as it goes forward is essentially enabling the slow churning of what I would call a technical dream that somebody like me has, that throws open the gates in such a way that you can go and build one system that can run the binaries that are meant to run every system exclusive to that system, especially the gaming binaries themselves, which, I know with high-end graphics getting as good as they have been, that emulation development is not what it used to be. And what I mean by that is just that as much as it takes the developers a lot longer to make a game, it also takes the emulation developers a lot longer to actually put an emulator together because of just how... But Vulkan saves an emulation developer a ton of time in actually writing, their emulator. It's the API that cuts development time in half, not even in half, like maybe far more than that, like a fourth, if not more than that even, it would probably take even longer than that, to do it if you didn't have Vulkan. What this means is, if you're a PC gamer at this point, you can expect ultimately that in the newness of time, especially with the way things have been in console battles and the console wars over the years, one of the biggest mistakes that I would testify that we made was back during the PlayStation 2 era. We pre-ordered the damn system, and that was before, we had regular firmware updates, and I understood the hacking aspect of jailbreaking a console, that you were best served to pre-order the system so that you could have on the lowest possible version in order to jailbreak it, because I'm technically inclined and I see all the red teaming and the publicly disclosed results on HackerOne, and so I know that if I want to exploit my own system, take advantage of the vulnerabilities in the software, myself and jailbreak my system to do things that a manufacturer did not intend to do, then I can benefit from the fact that this research is happening and stand on the shoulders of giants, basically, to do it, and just by programming in the DNS configurations to some DNS server that black holes, or what's the term for it? The DNS poisoning. There's definitely Pi-hole, but Pi-hole was I forget the terminology here. Actually, like I'm struggling for this the actual technical terminology for it. But what it does is, the DNS is like your computer's phone book. It associates IP addresses to domain names, and so your .com address will correspond to an IP address, and the computer needs both pieces of information to actually access a website when it's calling to it. It didn't used to be that way for websites, but now they will not let you just go directly to the IP address of a website. In the browser, they block that. It wasn't always that way, but now it is. So yeah. But what makes all of this like super, super important stuff that gamers should care about is like what I'm trying to allude to. Now, like I was trying to finish my elucidation, it means effectively by the time games that you actually want to play launch for the console, and games that are in like high demand, like a big Final Fantasy title, emulation development might still be a couple of years off at that point, but they'll be pretty far along by the time the console even launches games that you want to play. So if you're patient, you can just wait it out, to play it on a system that is probably by that point beefed up, to a much greater extent than the console itself, and will ultimately run the whole experience better than it, and we're moving towards that world now because of Vulkan and Vulkan development, and I don't think that the corporate interest that were behind all this intended for these gates to be thrown open the way that they have been as a result of all of this. I think that this is an unintended consequence of what's happened, but it's happening. And what it means is that we can now start dreaming of being able to build a computer that can run like all the games from every console and run it better than the console itself ever did.